Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion on the most recent YouTube controversy. It feels like we've been from one YouTube controversy to the next. We've had, ever since late 2013, the Content ID match system, the removal of protection from the Content ID system in late 2013 for people under a multi-channel network. Then we had the demonetization, the Adpocalypse, Google+, everyone remember that wonderful change by YouTube. And more recently, advertiser-friendly policies where YouTube demonetized or severely reduced the amount of ads you would have on a video if it wasn't deemed advertiser-friendly after a good number of advertisers boycotted YouTube as a result of some ads showing up on videos where you had real-world violence. Because social media, including YouTube, have been used by various extremist groups around the world, and ads end up being played on some of those videos from such groups. And advertisers reacted to that, and in response, YouTube reacted to it. Now, there is a common thread to all of this, to changes that YouTube has made, is that YouTube puts sweeping site-wide changes without enough thought, without enough regard for the people that have made YouTube profitable. Understand, when Google purchased YouTube for quite a few years, YouTube was not being profitable. It turned profitable because of content creators such as myself and obviously many others, many bigger content creators that were able to make a living off of it, right? To turn this in a sense into their work. And that's how YouTube became a profitable website. But YouTube as a company and Google itself have screwed up time and again because they themselves are pushing changes on the website without giving a damn about content creators. Advertiser-friendly policies were certainly part of that. Algorithm changes, Google+, so on and so forth. So many issues, so many changes with such negative implications. Now, there's a bit of good news from all that's happening, specifically this entire controversy surrounding the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA, is that apparently YouTube, maybe as a result of it, I don't know, but YouTube is possibly going to move to remove the advertiser-friendly situation. Your videos will not necessarily be flagged anymore, though whether or not we'll get similar ad revenue, or whether or not we will have a difference between certain videos remains to be seen. But YouTube is going to adopt certain new policies. Now, if I were a guessing man, I would guess that what's creating that situation is what's leading YouTube to make that decision is the current situation with the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, because they've tried to be quote-unquote advertiser-friendly, and it ended up blowing up in their face. But I'll talk about that in just a moment, because there is a bigger point to make here, far bigger than this, or all the other YouTube controversies even put together, or even some of the legal changes that are being implemented. Say, for instance, the copyright directive in the European Union, GDR before that, California privacy law, and then we have the FTC rules regards to COPPA. There is something far bigger that does involve all of these, and that's the nature of the internet in itself. See, the internet grew and became what it is today because although there were laws and regulations by governments, there was also a significant amount of non-interference on the internet, and that allowed it to get big and wild and become the tool that so many of us, so many people around the world, billions of people around the world, love to use for various purposes. But now we have governments stepping in more and more, government regulations, legislation. Now, you don't have to agree or disagree with any particular act. Now, for instance, I'm fine with the GDR. I know quite a few companies in Silicon Valley are not, but whatever. I'm personally fine with the GDR, the European GDR. I'm not fine with the copyright directive, and I'll talk about COPPA here in just a moment. But and the recent rule changes by the FTC. But what's important is that the internet became what it is without government interference, at least in the democratic world, whereas authoritarian governments have taken steps from the beginning to censor the internet, to limit access to it because they saw it as a threat, whereas freer governments, democratic countries, allowed it to be free, right? Of significant government interference. I mean, there was some, obviously, but not significant enough. That is changing, and it seems to me the democratic world is basically agreeing to some extent to China. Maybe not to the same level, but the governments around the world are getting more and more involved. Now, there are a couple of problems with this. Significant ones at that many people may not realize on the outset, and this is worth talking about very significantly. Number one, the people in governments, be it politicians, elected officials, bureaucrats, and all that, they don't really understand the internet. Many of them don't really get it, don't comprehend it. Maybe they use it, but they don't really understand how it works, how it functions, and how it should be used, and what kind of legislation would be suitable. Take, for instance, the recent debacle with the European Union Copyright Directive. What exactly happened there? What was the motivation behind it? Beyond any public debate or any discussion in the European Parliament, it basically boils down to this. The music industry and the movie industry want more money from social media websites like YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and from Google itself, from Google's search engine. They want more money from them, so they pass this directive, which has yet to be implemented. There are some lawsuits involving it, but that was the prime motivation about it, without any regard as to how this would affect the daily functioning of the internet in whatever way it would. And it has been negative. There is another issue with this. As governments become more and more involved, you're going to see different pieces of legislation being adopted. The problem with it, and this has been called some time ago, is you are going to see a fragmentation of the internet from what is a global internet to a more regional level. This was already a problem beforehand. There was a risk already beforehand, with countries like Russia, China, and so on. But when you have Europe and you have America and you're seeing different policies being adopted, then that becomes increasingly likely. But this is what we're going to be dealing with. And I don't think it's a good thing, at least for the short term, because we have a lot of elected officials, we have a lot of bureaucrats, they don't understand it, they don't get it. As newer generations of politicians and bureaucrats, as younger people who understand these things, come to power, and they will, things will hopefully get better. But we're talking here likely decades until we get, people that are competent enough to understand exactly what's going on and to adopt, practices that would make sense. And by that point, and during that time period, we're going to be dealing with a lot of nonsense. And I view it as overall a negative thing, because the internet, a global internet, right, with global reach, is one great achievement for humanity. It allows people across different countries, time zones, ethnicities, anything, right? People across the globe can communicate and share their thoughts and experiences with one another. There's a lot to learn, and it's a very useful tool to humanity. Thinking that you can control that, especially when the people in power, one, are driven by profit, are driven by corporate interests, two, don't really understand how it works. Thinking that's a good idea, it's really not. Now, mind you, in a vacuum, the idea of various governments getting involved would be theoretically a good thing, right? We want our elected officials to be, we want our democratic governments to be involved. We don't want just every, companies on the internet or on the internet to go wild, and there's plenty of bad things. So in theory, it could be good. But in practice, it's going to take a long time until we see anything good from government regulations and interference, significant ones at that. Now, with the recent situation with COPPA, the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, what I see here is, in the United States, you obviously have the tech lobby. So passing legislation. They tried that some years ago. Remember SOPA, PIPA, all that? They tried that some time ago, and it didn't work. There was a public outcry. These companies have a lot of power. So what they do then is like, oh, think of the children. Because pushing change under idea, oh, think of the children, is a tried and true tactic, especially when you're thinking of American politics. So this is how I read the situation. Now, for the record, I don't disagree with the FTC's decision necessarily. I'm going to talk about this, but I do view the overall change in terms of government interference, government regulation. I see that overall through a negative lens. I think that, and I'm not saying this as a YouTube content creator. I'm saying this as a human being who's used the internet, who's connected with people across the world, and who's really benefited from that. And I think a lot of people have benefited from that particular aspect of the internet. And I see the overall situation moving in a negative way, in a bad way. And I think that's something worth mentioning before going into the specifics of what exactly is going on in this particular case. Just something so people are aware where we're headed. I've been reminded with a lot of these scandals, a lot of these changes, I've been reminded of Black Ops 2. Call of Duty Black Ops 2, which you might laugh about this, but that game really dived into some fairly interesting political discussions. And one of it was the power of social media on politics. Like Raul Menendez, the main antagonist of that game, using social media to become like a global celebrity and really push his cause. That's one of the main takeaways, the power of social media. Now, a lot of these changes, and keep in mind when Call of Duty Black Ops 2 was released, then we have, of course, the Arab Spring, and you start seeing these changes in aftermath that, specifically aimed at some extremist groups, but then we see governments and companies on the internet also starting to apply those kind of policies as well on regular users. I mean, the demonetization, the deplatforming, all of those tactics were initially used on extremist groups in the aftermath of the Arab Spring, or the Arab, winter, I guess people have called it. So that's what we're dealing with. That's the impact. Ever since that situation, we've seen this more and more and more, and I can't view it in any positive way overall. Even if I do agree with certain specifics, I think it's overall going to have a negative impact on the internet, and there is a risk of fragmentation of the internet. Now, with regards to the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, we have the FTC's own word on this and exactly what's going on. Let me read from their site. YouTube channel owners, is your content directed to children? Under COPPA, how do I know if my channel is directed to children? Since the FTC and New York Attorney General announced their September 2019 settlement with YouTube for violations of the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act rule, we've heard that question from channel owners, sometimes called content creators. If you're a channel owner who shares content on user-generated platforms like YouTube, read on for the FTC staff guidance. Okay. The lawsuit against YouTube and Google alleged that the company illegally collected personal information from children in violation of COPPA. According to the complaint, the companies collected that information from viewers of child-directed YouTube channels in the form of persistent identifiers that track users across the internet, but didn't notify parents and get their consent. To settle the case, YouTube and Google agreed to create a mechanism so that channel owners can designate when the videos they upload to YouTube are, to use the words of COPPA, directed to children. The purpose of this requirement is to make sure that both YouTube and channel owners are complying with the law. The provision of the settlement that has raised question among content creators about how to determine if what they upload to YouTube or other platforms is directed to children. The answer requires a brief summary of some key COPPA provisions passed by Congress in 1998. The Child Online Privacy Protection Act is a federal law that protects the privacy of children under 13. COPPA's fundamental principle is one that most people can agree on. Parents, not kids, companies, platforms, or content creators should be in control when it comes to information collected from children online. The FTC enforces their law through the COPPA rule. In general, COPPA requires operators of commercial websites and online services that are directed to children to provide notice and obtain verifiable parental consent before they collect personal information from kids under 13. The COPPA rule defines personal information to include obvious things, but also covers what are called persistent identifiers, behind-the-scenes code that recognizes user over time and across different sites or online services. That could be an IP address. Okay, so how does COPPA apply to channel owners who upload their content to YouTube or another third-party platform? COPPA applies in the same way it would if the channel owner had its own website or app. If a channel owner uploads content to a platform like YouTube, the channel might meet the definition of a website or online service covered by COPPA, depending on the nature of the content and information collected. If the content is directed to children, and if the channel owner or someone on its behalf, for example, an ad network, collects personal information from viewers of that content, for example, for a persistent identifier, the channel is covered by COPPA. Once COPPA applies, the operator must provide notice, obtain verifiable parental content, and meet COPPA's other requirements. For information how to comply with COPPA, okay, and then it goes into exactly what it identifies as children's content. The determination of whether content is child-directed will be clearer in some contexts than others, but we can share some general rules of thumb. First, unless you're affirmatively targeting kids, there are many subject categories where you don't have to worry about COPPA. The same would be politics and all that. The same would be true for videos aimed at high school or college students. On the other hand, if your content includes traditional children pastime or activities, it may be child-directed. For example, the FTC recently determined that an online dress-up game was child-directed. Second, just because your video has bright colors or animated characters doesn't mean you're automatically covered by COPPA. While many animated shows are directed to kids, the FTC recognizes there can be animated programming that appeals to everyone. Third, the complaint in the YouTube case offers some example of channels the FTC considered to be directed to children. For example, many content creators explicitly stated in the About section of their YouTube channel that their intended audience was children under 13. Other channels made similar statements in communications with YouTube. In addition, many of the channels featured popular animated children's programs or showed kids playing with toys or participating in other child-oriented activities. Some of the channel owners also enabled settings that made their content appear when you search for the names of popular toys or animated characters. Want to see the FTC? It's okay. Finally, if you've applied the factors okay and wonder, it might help to consider how others view your content similar to yours. Has your channel been reviewed? Alright. And then it talks about what are the penalties and all that. So there are quite a few things to take away from that. Quite a few YouTubers have taken this in a positive way, saying, oh, it's not really going to affect me. At least not the FTC directly. How YouTube is going to affect content creators is a very different affair. But I think, for the most part, if you're reading that, and if you understand anything about American politics and American government, you can probably rest easy and under the idea that the FTC is going to come after your channel, unless you're a channel that's deliberately targeting children and abusing the system. Because here's the problem with what they wrote there. Yes, many channels with the general content will be fine. Like, take for instance someone like PewDiePie, biggest YouTuber there, individual YouTuber. He makes content for a general audience, though he is aware that quite a lot of younger people watch his content, and he probably makes content specifically for younger people. But he's not making content specifically just for kids. He's making content for teenagers, for younger adults, all that, for a very broad audience. That's how it works for him. There are other YouTube channels that do make content specifically for kids, and they're going to be screwed over by these changes from the FTC, because here lies the issue. Content creators that make content for kids are going to be held liable for data collected through ads. But here is the problem that the FTC doesn't really understand. At least this is from my perspective. Now, I could very well be wrong on this, But as a content creator, someone who's been on this site for a while, I have never had any bloody control or understanding of how the ads work on the site. The only thing I have a control over is, do I monetize this video? Okay, I monetize the video. Where do ads get placed? Like at the beginning, at the end? I don't have any control over the ads themselves, the advertisements themselves. I have no clue what kind of ads people are getting, how those ads work, what kind of data is collected. You might say, well, you have a contract with the multi-channel network, right? Yes, I do, but I don't know if even they collect that data. I can tell you who does collect that data, and they're not inclined to share. They're very difficult to reach as a company. They're very difficult to get 2 words out of, and that's YouTube itself. As a content creator, and this is a frustration that many people that work on the site share, it is exceptionally difficult to get any kind of help or any kind of understanding of really how the systems that power YouTube work. Do you think YouTube is sharing the information of how their ads work with individual content creators? Maybe in some cases, maybe with some big networks, maybe. I don't think so, though. That's something that YouTube probably has themselves. So we're being held liable for something that YouTube itself is doing. When we're talking here legally, criminally, I guess you could even call it, or we're going to be fined for quite a lot of money for something we don't really have control over. Yes, we know that there are personalized ads, but we don't know how those ads work, or what kind of data it collects, or how that data is used. We do not have that understanding. That's the point, and the FTC is going to hold content creators that do make content for children liable for that specifically. That's insane. Now, the way I'm reading the way you can read this, the big but in this, is overall, most content creators will not be screwed over, and the people that are getting screwed over, I should say, are getting screwed over because they're being held liable for something they probably don't have full control over, or are doing, though they know. Though, to be clear, there are many people that do game the system, and many people that have made content for a kids audience for the purposes of getting ads to that audience for their own financial benefit. And the FTC is saying, yes, that's illegal. Fair enough. That's the law. We can argue about the specifics of the law and all that, and kids on the internet. Fair enough, but that's the law. That's how it is, and people are breaking the law. But here's who's breaking the law more so than anything else. YouTube is breaking the law and has been breaking it for a long time. The advertiser-friendly decision that YouTube implemented recently, well, by recently, it's like, 1-2 years, something like that, was specifically aimed at the idea of creating an environment at YouTube where it's like family-friendly content, kid content, all that. And it went further than it's like, oh yeah, it's people, between the age range of 13 to 18. No, it's the age range of below 13. They've been deliberately targeting this to get a lot of money from advertisers. That was their entire model. That's what they wanted to transform their platform into, until the US federal government, or the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, basically stepped in because of New York. And rightly so, right? Rightly so when it comes to it. It is blatantly breaking the law that was designed many years ago, and you can say, oh, the law is outdated and all that. We can have that discussion, but the point is, if there's a law in a book and yet YouTube is blatantly violating it, to the point that what the FTC did when they brought YouTube regards to this case is, oh, here are all your statements that you yourself have made with regards to how your content is designed for children and how your platform is a great place for advertisers targeting children. That's what the FTC did. This is why they have them nailed to the wall on this issue, and that's why YouTube didn't want to contest this and reach the settlement, because YouTube has done a lot of shit over the years. They know they've done a lot of horrible shit over the years, and they got finally caught doing it and are being held into account. Now the problem for content creators is going to be this. Not what the FTC is going to do necessarily directly, but what YouTube is going to do. So what is YouTube going to do? Well, they've implemented a system where you have to flag each video whether or not it's designed for kids. And you can also put a setting on your channel so that when you upload a new video or a live stream, it gets automatically flagged as being for or not for kids. people would argue, oh, I have a general audience and that option is missing. There's a particular argument, link in the description of a video on that issue and how YouTube is withholding that kind of information from us for their own benefit, because YouTube wants action. YouTube wants people to be riled against the FTC, but the FTC is not the villain here. YouTube is the villain. I mean, we can like YouTube and Google as companies, but they've done some horrible shit over the years, and they finally got caught with it, and we shouldn't be confused by their misdirection on the subject. But here's what YouTube's going to do that's really going to screw everyone over. Maybe they end up not doing it, but this is what they did announce, and they're going to turn their wonderful bots, their content ID system, they're going to turn their robots, their AI, machine learning, whatever, they're going to turn that to comb their platform to determine whether or not content on that platform is made for children or not. So in the same way that whenever you upload a video or stream something, it gets, you have an algorithm on YouTube that determines whether or not it's advertiser friendly or not, whether or not you have copyrighted content on it or not, and there's so many ways to abuse that crap. Like, people have literally uploaded entire movies by putting some filter or shrinking the image or making some sound changes. Yes, there are many ways to abuse the system. It's very badly designed. We're going to have that system determine whether or not content that you upload to YouTube is kids friendly or is designed for children or not. And how in the fuck is it going to do that? Like, how exactly is that going to do? Now, they've said, to be clear, that they might turn it off, but the fact that YouTube's in response to this is like, yeah, let's screw content creators further with our stupid, bloody system that has proven time and again it doesn't know what the fuck it's doing. It's not perfect because we're afraid, because we got caught with our pants down, we got nailed to the wall by the FTC, and we have to do something to show we're doing something. Never mind whether or not that something is an actual good idea, because it's not. It's not going to solve any issues on the website. It's going to flag a lot of content that isn't designed for children. Look at my channel. I can tell you this much for a bloody fact. My audience overwhelmingly, like 96%, is above the age of 18, according to YouTube's own fucking analytics that I get access to. According to the data that YouTube provides me, that's 96% of all people that watch my content are older than 18. That's according to YouTube. And the 4 to 6% is people between 13 and 18. So how many kids does that count? Clearly, my content is not designed for children. I find it laughable, but who knows how this bloody system will flag my content? And this is the problem. This is the issue with the way YouTube operates. This is the way that they react to things, because they don't care about content creators. They just want to use content creators for their own benefit. And the way that the response was modeled clearly showed that. We cannot give you legal advice. They don't want to have any liability for something that, in this particular case, when it came to copyrighted content, the whole kerfuffle with content ID, when it came to copyrighted content, yes, a content creator is responsible for the copyright of the content they upload. It's not YouTube's responsibility or liability in that case. But similarly, in the same vein, it should not be content creators that get held liable and get screwed over for something that YouTube itself has done. Now, there might be a silver lining, a positive from all of this, in that without the ability for YouTube to go specifically after children, they're going to have to find some other alternatives, which means, who knows, maybe the whole advertiser Adpocalypse is going to go away. I mean, they've said that already, so we can only hope that that certainly ends up being the case. We'll have to wait and see how that pans out. Christine here on Serious Gaming, signing out. Thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for more. And if you do like my content, subscribe, like, and enable notifications so you know when I upload more.